organic molecules lecture done, and now we're going to go through some reactions that happen in the body. So when we eat foods or we drink liquids, when they go inside our body, they don't stay as those molecules. If I eat a fat molecule, I'm going to break it down into all these different carbons and hydrogens and then reattach it. If I drink protein, I'm going to take that protein I ate, break it down into all my amino acids, and then reassemble them. So inside our bodies, we have a number of different reactions that happen. So we're going to go through a few key reactions that happen inside not just our bodies, but the bodies of all living things, bacteria, fungi, plants, and animals. Okay? They're all performing certain types of reactions with these organic molecules that we learned about in our last lecture. So let's take a look at some of these key reactions here. Okay, so organisms, once built, and when we build an organism, we're only going to need those 4 macromolecules: proteins, lipids, fats, and nucleic acids. But once they're built, we have to run the body, or we have to run the organism. And for that, we need to have reactions. Okay? Now, inside certain organisms or inside their body, they need to have certain conditions, like a set body temperature. Okay, we need to have a set body temperature. We need to have a certain blood pH. We need to have blood glucose levels, and we can't really vary from these conditions. If we do, we begin to fail. If your blood glucose levels drop, you're going to die. If they raise too high, you're going to die. If your body temperature drops, you're going to die. If they raise too high, you're going to die. So we have to keep these conditions in check, and we're going to learn about how we do that in our homeostasis unit. But we're going to talk about some of the reactions that we do in order to keep these parameters in check. So the 4 main reactions we're going to talk about, and we're only going to talk about the first 3 here. We're going to save this till we get into proteins, is neutralization reactions. So an example of keeping our blood pH in check. Redox reactions, which involves our body temperature. And then condensation and hydrolysis reactions, which how we control our blood glucose levels. Right. So the first thing we're going to look at is our blood pH. So pH is basically a scale used to measure the acidity or the base or the alkalinity of a substance. Okay? So 0 to 7 is acid, 7 to 14 are bases. Okay? So when we look down at this chart down here, this would be a very, very strong acid, less strong, less strong, less strong, less strong. Number 7 is neutral, so something like water, pure water, okay, would be neutral. And then as you go up, you become more and more basic. So 14 is really basic, a very dangerous base, and 0 would be a very strong acid. Okay? Now, our blood has to be basically between 7.35 and 7.45, so it needs to be slightly basic. So we need to hover our blood right around here. Okay, if it becomes 9, 10, 11, we're going to have some major problems, and if it drops between 4 and 3, we're going to have some major problems. Okay, and if it becomes too acidic, we call that acidosis. If it becomes too basic, we call it alkalosis. So some of these symptoms of if your blood becomes too acidic, okay, you're going to have headaches, confusion. You could have seizures, diarrhea. It can cause a whole bunch of different problems if your blood becomes acidic, so we don't want that to happen. We also don't want it to happen to become too basic. We're also going to have confusion, diarrhea, some of the same symptoms that you'd have whether your blood's acid or basic. But we want to make sure that our blood's not. We don't want it to be acidic. We don't want it to be basic. We want it to be that perfect around that 7.35. Okay. So how we do that? Okay, our body uses neutralization reactions to make sure that our blood pH is in proper order. Okay. Now, how we do that is if we drink an acid or we eat an acid, we're going to use a base to neutralize it. Okay, so a base will neutralize an acid, and if we eat something that's basic, okay, then we can neutralize that by using an acid. So an acid neutralizes a base, and a base neutralizes an acid. Now, we also use these things called buffers, okay, which is just kind of a really quick way of adjusting an acid and a base together. Okay, and an example would be carbonic acid. So let's take a look at an example. Now, there's a lot of information here on the slide, but here's the key things. Okay, is when our blood becomes too basic. Okay, when our blood becomes too basic, so our blood levels are say at an 8 or a 9, what our body will do is it will take water and carbon dioxide, okay, and it will convert it into a carbonic acid. Okay, so if our blood's basic, our body is going to make carbonic acid, which is then going to lower our pH and bring our pH back down to where it should be. Okay? Because as we make this acid, our blood's going to become a little bit more acidic, and it's going to turn it from being too basic into the proper levels. Now, what happens if we eat something really basic and our blood becomes really basic, or high alkalinity is another term for being really having basic blood? Then what we'll do is we'll take our carbonic acid and we'll convert it back into carbon dioxide and water. So we basically use this kind of system to control our pH. If our blood's too basic, we're going to make carbonic acid. If our blood's too acidic, we're going to make carbon dioxide and water. And we basically use this process back and forth to make sure that our blood doesn't go out of whack in terms of pH. And again, we're going to be eating acidic foods and basic foods and drinking acidic liquids and basic liquids all the time. So we have to have a system to make sure that our blood doesn't fall out of whack. Okay? So that's a neutralization reaction. Okay. The next reaction we want to talk about are called redox reactions, and they're what we use to control temperature. So similar to how the body can only function within a narrow pH range, can't be too acidic, can't be too basic, same was true for body temperature. So our normal body temperature is between 36.5 and 37.2 degrees Celsius. Anything above 39 is considered very dangerous. You're going to get heat stroke, or also called hyperthermia. Okay, the key thing, per there. And anything below 36 degrees is going to be hypothermia. So we have to make sure our body temperature doesn't drop too low or doesn't get too high. And this is all as we go outside, as we start exercising, as you get water on you, as you get snow on you. So it's very difficult for our body to keep this constant body temperature, which we must have. Okay. All right, so there's some just different things that will happen to you at different temperatures. Okay. The main thing I want to go through is how we're going to adjust this. So we can control temperature of our body using cooling techniques like sweating. We bring our blood right to our skin, we pant, or we can do warming techniques, okay, which are called redox reactions. So when we want to warm up, we're going to use redox reactions. Okay, and it's basically electrons are transferred from one molecule to another. Now, key here is what you need to know is what a redox reaction is, and what I mean by that is what is oxidized and what is reduced. Okay, so redox means that you're going to have an oxidation, you're also going to have a reduction. Now, the way to remember that is called Leo the Lion says Ger. Okay, so whatever molecule loses the electron, it's considered oxidized. So that's Leo. The molecule that loses the electron is oxidized. Okay, now when the molecule loses an electron, it has to give it to somebody. So whatever molecule takes the electron, the gain of the electron is reduced. So one molecule is going to be oxidized, the one that loses an electron, and the other molecule is going to be reduced, the one that gains an electron. And we remember that by Leo the Lion says Ger. So although our body performs a number of different redox reactions, one that we're going to talk about is how we create heat in our body. Okay? So when we want to warm up, what we're going to do is we're going to take glucose molecules that we've ingested. We're going to take oxygen that we're inhaling out of the air. We're going to combine these together, and we're going to basically do a combustion reaction. We're going to burn this. Okay? And we're going to burn this into CO2, which we're going to breathe out, and that's why we breathe out CO2. We also breathe out a little bit of water vapor. We will breathe out a little bit of heat, but we're going to try and keep that heat inside our body and just warm ourselves up. Okay? So in this example, glucose is oxidized. So glucose is going to lose electrons. Okay? And it's going to lose electrons to carbon dioxide and to water. Okay? So in this situation, glucose is oxidized, right? Loss of electrons. And the ones that's going to gain electrons, okay, we're going to put it as oxygen is going to gain the electrons. I know I said CO2 or water before. Say oxygen is going to gain the electrons, so it is reduced. So glucose, loss of the electrons, and they come right over to oxygen, which becomes reduced. Okay, and this reaction, which we call a redox reaction, is going to create heat. Okay. So example, as the body temperature drops, the body will instruct the cells to start burning glucose inside them. Okay, muscle cells that are burning glucose will use some of the energy to contract the muscles. The contraction of the muscles causes frictions, which aids in additional heat. Okay, that heat is going to be transferred to the blood, and then the blood's going to send it through the rest of our body. Okay. Now the last one, and these are particularly important, okay, probably the most important reaction that we're going to talk about, are condensation and hydrolysis reactions. And this is how we, say, build molecules by taking simple units and putting them together, or breaking them apart, where we have something bigger and then we want to break them into individual subunits. So a condensation, or sometimes called a dehydration, these mean the exact same thing, are reactions used to attach smaller molecules to create a large one. So as we bring in, say, glucose, and we're eating a whole bunch of glucose or carbohydrates, okay, if we have extra, we want to store them. Well, we don't want to store them as these individual units. Here's an individual glucose, this is an individual glucose. So what we do is we use a reaction, a condensation or a dehydration reaction, that basically attaches these two together. So what's going to happen is you're going to take these individual subunits and attach them together so that they're linked. Right? And when you do this, okay, you release a molecule of water. And if we keep doing this, we can take a whole bunch of glucose and make a whole line of them all attached. And this is how we store extra carbohydrates in our bodies. In animals, it would be glycogen, or in plants, it would be starch. So glucose, individual molecules, going into a long chain, known as glycogen or starch, is done by condensation or dehydration reactions. Now the opposite. Okay, say you haven't eaten for a little while. So say you skip breakfast, and now you don't have any blood glucose in your blood. So basically, you have to take some of your stored stuff, okay? And you store this again by using a condensation or dehydration reaction. So this molecule right here, okay, you're now going to break that molecule apart back to the glucose molecules. So when you're starving and you haven't eaten anything, you're going to take what you've stored, the stored carbohydrates, break them down into individual glucoses, and then you're going to take these glucoses, bring them into your cell, and process them. So these reactions are basically opposite, okay? Where, let me just go back to that for a second. This is a condensation or dehydration, the forming of large complex molecules from simple ones. And then when we take that large molecule that we made them and we break them down, that's a hydration reaction, which requires water. This one produces water. And those are the basics of chemical reactions, okay, inside the body. So we want to know all three of them. The big one being the condensation and the hydrolysis reactions, but you should also know about the neutralization and the redox reactions. Okay, thanks, and make sure you go through the content below